It effectively replaces my CRT, which is what matters most to me. Okay, so quite recently I've managed to acquire the highly sought after RetroTink4K. Those savvy in the retro community are already informed on the luxurious nature of this particular device. Those not so savvy might be wondering what the real incentives are for procuring a device like this. One of the harsh truths about retro gaming at the moment, mainly in using original hardware, is that you really do need an external video scaler in order to hook up those retro consoles into a newer TV. Modern television manufacturers simply aren't going to support game systems this old. Even if your HD TV has the supported connections, even if your HD TV supports the low resolutions of these systems, it's still not going to be an optimal playing experience in most cases. So you need an external video scaler in order to process those old video signals for HD TV use. Luckily, there are plenty of really good and really affordable retro scalers that for most people will be perfectly acceptable. Scalers such as the RetroTink 2X, GBS Control, and OSSC. Maybe spending an extra $100 seems a little steep just to get retro consoles playable on modern TVs, but if you've ever used those really cheap composite to HDMI adapters, then you might understand more why such scalers would be worth the price. Which brings us to the RetroTink4K. If there's one thing you're not going to get around with this device, it's the price. This thing costs $750. That is pretty damn expensive. There's no sugarcoating it, there's no working around it. If you want the Tink 4K, it'll cost a pretty penny. So I think we ultimately need to have a very necessary reminder that for most of you watching, there is an incredibly high chance that you do not need this device. Hell, I don't need it. I had the RetroTink 5X before, and while $300 is still pretty expensive for most people to spend on a video scaler, the 5X could easily last you forever to upscale your retro games. The real cost of a product like this comes from what you can do with it and what personal value you see in it. If you feel $750 is not worth it, then that's perfectly okay. You don't need to buy it, and your money would be better spent somewhere else. Despite how much I wanted the Tink 4K when it initially launched, I intentionally held off on buying it right away, mainly because it immediately sold out twice for the first 2 batch drops, but also because for me, the money simply wasn't right yet. FOMO is a bitch. It's foolish to succumb to it, and everyone would be wiser to incorporate the simple childhood process of saving up for the things they want. I could always afford the Tink 4K whenever I wanted, but I wanted to save a little extra on the side to make that $750 nothing to swallow. So now we come to why specifically did I want the Tink 4K. Firstly, it starts off with me getting a 4K capture card. My 1080p capture card before was still doing just fine by me, but after getting a PS5, I knew I needed an upgrade. After getting a 4K card, then it simply became a matter of wanting to capture any game footage at 4K resolution as much as possible. The Tink 4K scales games to 4K, so as far as basic picture quality is concerned, it's a simple desire to have clean video capture. The 5X could still produce very good video output, but then so could the OSSC, which was my first video scaler. The main reason why I wanted the Tink 4K is because of its CRT filters. The discussion of how retro games should look has always been an extremely silly one to me because ultimately there's no definitive right answer. There can't be. Even interlaced 480i can be totally valid because that's how retro compilations from Xbox, PS2, and GameCube would look on a CRT, and it's certainly old enough to have a nostalgic appeal. I do mostly have an affinity for CRT-like visuals because of the various benefits that come through a CRT window. While I do have a CRT at this moment, I may not in the future, and I certainly can't play every game through it. The main reason I bought the RetroTink 5X was because Mike Chi incorporated more complex CRT filters beyond basic scan lines. Proper slot mask and aperture grill replication greatly boosted the joy from playing retro games on an HD TV to me. Before, I would just play with sharp pixels since I see that as the next best look for retro games personally. For upscalers that don't have good CRT replication, then I go for sharp pixels. But thanks to the 5X having pretty decent CRT filters, then I'd play with them over sharp pixels. Thanks to the RetroTink 4K having a full 4K resolution to work with, then the replication of a CRT got even more advanced. While it may be silly to desire such an expensive piece of equipment for a use case like this, understand that the development of the Tink4K started after Mike found more joy developing CRT filters for the 5X after trying to appease pixel-perfect goobers who need reference quality video capture for some reason. After messing around with experimental firmware letting the 5X output 4K with CRT filters, albeit at 24 FPS, and seeing how good they looked, the vision of a 4K scaler began. Because sharp pixels certainly looks good enough at a basic high resolution, 1080p is plenty for a sharp pixel look for most retro games. A CRT look, however, ironically needs as high a resolution as possible to match the unique look of CRT displays. 1080p is the minimum to get something halfway decent. A full 4K resolution is necessary to replicate the subpixel division, where each white pixel is a visible red, green, and blue subpixel. Then, a filter could finally look comparable to a genuine CRT display. Unfortunately, such filters do have a side effect of making the image look extremely dark. Thankfully, the Tink4K has HDR support for TVs that really support it. And I mean really support it. You need to have a TV that can generate enough nits that HDR demands. It's the main reason among others that I invested in an OLED TV. To briefly sidestep for a bit, I'd like to mention a small but very impactful perk of the Tink4K, the profiles that come pre-installed on the SD card. Anyone who's been following the progress of these retro scalers are probably familiar with the egregious amount of tinkering with the settings to get the image to look as good as it can. Default output will always look just fine for those who have better priorities such as, playing games. But to get pixels that are even sharper and CRT filters to look even more accurate, then further adjusting is required. Those who owned an OSSC may remember the countless amounts of settings tweaks with confusing parameters like sampling phase, back porch, sample rate, and more. Thankfully, such folks in the retro community like Firebrand X personally dedicated hours of time to dial in optimal settings for simple profile importing. This led to the 5X having pre-installed sampling settings that should satisfy most people out of the gate, along with CRT profiles to mimic a variety of specific displays. With the Tink4K, we now have a crap load of profiles optimized for many systems and desired looks. I see this as very important because while Tink is in the name, it ultimately does put less time into playing games and more time into fiddling with settings. I'm sure we've all been down that rabbit hole of spending hours messing with settings until satisfied, only to have a change of heart later resulting in more time spent making tweaks. Having profiles that'll make whatever retro system look as good as it can when it comes to sharp pixels goes a very long way for me, and I really appreciate those who put in the work to make actual tinkering as minimal as possible. This extends to the variety of CRT profiles. There's profiles that replicate specific models of CRT displays, and ones that have a general look, which is what I prefer. I think my favorite so far is the generic Trinitron profile, as that's the CRT look I'm most used to. These profiles are based on specific inputs, so if you're using SCART like me, then you'll have to change the input appropriately. Then you'll have to adjust the nits until the brightness looks right. I don't quite understand it, since the LG C2 has around 800 nits. Matching that on the Tink4K is still dark as shit, so I'd say just crank it until it looks optimally bright enough, or even a tad too bright, since there's the matter of black frame insertion. Some of you may already be aware, but black frame insertion is a modern display technique that cycles a black frame after every other frame. It's usually exclusive to displays that have at least 120 Hz. That way, having a black frame inserted can still result in a 60 FPS image. The point of this is to greatly increase the motion clarity on moving objects. It's something that I can't exactly show through video, but you can find other channels with better equipment to see what I mean. Every modern fixed pixel display will exhibit some form of motion smearing as the screen scrolls. It does take a keen eye to even see it, and believe me, if you don't, then you're the fortunate one. Either way, old CRT TVs straight up had much better motion clarity on moving objects. Not gonna lie, the motion smearing did get more noticeable when playing with CRT filters on a flat panel display. With black frame insertion greatly improving the motion clarity, it makes using CRT filters even more enjoyable. There is a bit of a flicker when using BFI, but everyone I've shown in person either said they couldn't notice it, or it naturally went away as their eyes adjusted. BFI will also darken the image a bit, But that's not a problem if you crank up the nit value. You may also experience a bit more input lag when using such a feature, but not to a distracting degree in my experience. The Tink4K does have its own BFI, which is awesome for displays that don't have it, but you are limited to a max output res of 1440p. So CRT filters won't look as good, but still plenty satisfying. It's another reason to get an OLED, as it has its own native BFI support, which I can use for 4K video. The final result, with a CRT filter to HDR boosting brightness to BFI improving motion clarity, creates an image that comes imperceptibly close to a real deal CRT. This is very important to me because while getting sharp pixels has always been easy for retro games, especially in the emulation space, replicating the particular look of a CRT was always a challenge. For decades, you just needed a way to play games on a real CRT. But now, needing a CRT isn't necessary anymore in my opinion. The RetroTink4K is a perfect substitute and certainly a smarter choice opposed to a real CRT. Especially now when getting a real CRT is a little more challenging compared to how it was 10 years ago. So many retro enthusiasts will tell you to get yourself a PVM as it's the highest quality CRT display, but those things will run you hundreds of dollars, maybe up to and over $1,000. In that respect, the price of a Tink4K doesn't seem so bad when you consider everything else it can do. Thanks to prescaling, you can slice the resolution of modern games down to 240p. Then you can apply CRT filters to retro re-releases as long as they have a basic integer upscale. Many retro re-releases today don't have good CRT filters, so the Tink4K being able to inject a CRT look in most of them is awesome. I'll be serious when I say it greatly boosts the appeal of using emulators in my opinion. You all know me and my weird fetish of playing as OG of an experience as possible. So getting very authentic CRT visuals through an emulator with this scaler is very appealing to me. One of the reasons I keep original consoles lying around is to still be able to play on a CRT. Thanks to the Tink4K, needing these consoles doesn't seem too necessary anymore, which is pretty liberating. Because it's not just retro consoles, the Tink4K has an HDMI input, meaning modern consoles with HDMI can be used on this scaler. May seem unnecessary, but even now you'd be surprised how even 1080p may not look as good on 4K displays. With the Tink4K, 1080p content could look noticeably sharper, and 720p can look extra crisp. Using grid filters to mimic native 1080p and 720p displays can make playing games native to these resolutions feel extra authentic. Seems silly, but still feels more practical and convenient than having multiple TVs lying around for multiple systems. Unfortunately, HD systems are limited to either 720p and 1080p with the Tink4K. But for say playing retro re-releases on a PS5, then it's not so bad to set the system to 720, then using the Tink's prescale feature to then apply CRT filters. As long as the retro re-release itself offers some form of integer upscale, which I believe most of them do thankfully. Seriously, this greatly boosts the appeal of say the Switch Online service. It has its own CRT filter, but it's horrible and can even fuck up your TV to my knowledge. But passing it through the Tink4K allows me to achieve that authentic original CRT feel I value so much with original consoles. It may take a bit of tinkering on a per game and console basis to get a look that satisfies, but you do have 12 hotkey profiles to save you future hassle. It's in this way where I see the cost of the Tink4K to really be worth it in retrospect. I mean, come on, retro gaming can be so damn expensive now depending on what you're going for. As someone who yearns for that OG-like experience, I'll admit, it's hard to recommend when you factor the cost of consoles, games, and old CRT TVs. Shit will add up remarkably fast, not to mention the countless space needed to set up all these materials. The Tink4K acts as a perfect equalizer that allows you to get a visually OG experience from almost any modern console source. Whether it be an original console with an RGB mod or HDMI mod, a Raspberry Pi, an FPGA device, or a retro compilation. They can all look equally good when passed through the Tink4K with good CRT filters. I can't overstate how liberating that is, as I'm no longer feeling that extreme affinity over one way to play retro games. I like a CRT look, and with the Tink4K, I feel I can achieve that look with just about any means to play a retro game. Right now, my NES is currently under lengthy repairs. I'm not sure when or if it'll be back to working again. Normally, I'd be pretty upset about that due to my affinity with playing on OG hardware. But thanks to the Tink4K's filters looking so convincing, I think I'll go back to the NES Classic Edition as my go-to NES device. It normally doesn't have very impressive video settings with a not so great CRT filter, as well as pixel shimmering with the 4:3 aspect ratio. However, slapping on the Tink4K CRT filters makes it look just like how my original NES would have looked, which helps ignore the fact that it's only emulation. It's the ultimate example of how versatile and impactful the Tink4K can be if you let it handle your games. Yeah, $750 is still expensive. If you still don't see the real appeal of it, then like I said, that's perfectly okay. Your money is better spent elsewhere. But since the Tink4K effectively allows me to make just about any game from any source look like any old CRT display, then $750 is more than worth it for me. Usually when capturing retro game footage from original hardware, I capture with sharp pixels, as for direct capture, then sharp pixels is the easiest on the eyes to represent the game's core visuals. I can do that since I use a video splitter to play on a CRT while capturing sharp pixels. But I'm not gonna lie, should playing on a CRT not be possible, then I'm using filters, since ultimately I don't think I care anymore. Filters may not look the most attractive in direct capture in most cases, but the 4K resolution reduces filter compression artifacts, so I can live with that. This doesn't even have to be mutually exclusive to retro style games of low resolution. Applying CRT filters to higher resolution games can do some serious wonders to the overall clarity of the image. I often think about the FW900 or other such high resolution CRTs. Owners of such displays will completely swear by how good such high-res CRTs can make games look, without having any of the issues that plagued fixed pixel displays, such as upscaling artifacts, pixel shimmering, aliasing, and motion smearing. Getting such displays can be extremely challenging, even compared to standard res consumer CRTs. But I've always wondered if such CRT filters can simply be applied to higher res games to gain the same sort of benefits that you'd get from lower res content. I've experimented with playing 720p and 1080p content through the Tink4K with standard CRT filters being applied, and it's very interesting. The way this kind of look can mask image artifacts and texture imperfections results in an almost uncanny but extremely pleasant image. In the case of Resident Evil 2, it sort of gives an ultra smooth, pre-rendered look. Kinda brings back some of the aesthetic from the original, which I really like. As always, it would still most likely be better if you can play at native 4K for such modern titles. But if you're in a situation where you just have to settle for a lower resolution, then slapping on a CRT filter can vastly improve the image. Like, deadass, I found this to be more visually attractive than all these reconstruction methods like FSR or DLSS. It's the same appeal as retro games on CRTs, where your eyes fill in the blanks to fill in the lost detail, and it comes together frighteningly well. Not to mention the use of black frame insertion grants you the same crystal clear motion clarity that you get from CRTs. Then with the Tink4K, blast up the nits with HDR. If this is comparable to how viewing such high resolution games look like on high-res CRTs and PC monitors, then that only further boosts the value of the Tink4K. I'll never acquire a high-res CRT monitor, so having access to a similar image output is extremely exciting for me. Not gonna lie, for any games that I'll play in 1080p or 720p, I may play with CRT filters on the Tink because it really does add back some of the sauce you get from real CRTs, which is extremely awesome. That just about covers everything I wanted to talk about in this video. This was never going to be a full review of the Tink4K, as there's plenty of them you can find. I only wanted to express why I bought it specifically. I would like to take a moment and thank those who chose to stick with it this far. I apologize that this one took a while to come out. I got caught up in some PC related issues and took time off for some casual gaming. I also started watching The Boys and couldn't stop. Anyway, I already know what the next one will be, so hopefully it shouldn't take too long. P.S. I'm going to shit on RetroArch. Till then, that should do it for me today, so I just want to say thank you for watching.